I remember he went to make a cup of tea. My dad didn't do much for himself. My mum literally does everything and she is superwoman. But my dad went to make a cup of tea and he was like, he knew that there was a kettle and there was a mug and there was a tea bag and he knew he had to get the milk. He just couldn't figure out what went where.
So 18 months later, you're still waiting for a death certificate.
Yep. And we're still waiting for the cause of death and whether it's ruled as industrial disease, which it everything points towards heading of the football.
So I promise on this podcast, Hayley, we are not going to talk about our aches and creaks.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And we've done that before we came on air.
We did.
We both sat down and went, ooh, ow, oh, I need to have an operation here and I need to do this here. We're not going to go there.
I whipped off the heated back pad. Yeah.
We're going to park it and make out that we're still back where we first met, which was around about, I guess must have been well, you would have been really early 20s.
Yeah,
and I would probably be late 20s at the time. So that takes us a long way back, about 10 years.
Just 10 years.
10 gentle years.
No,
but you've been on Sky Sports News now for 14 years, you were telling me.
Because obviously you and I met however long ago that was.
Yeah.
I joined when it was 2006.
Yeah, and I'd been there for about 5 years at that point.
2005, 6. And then, I stayed for a year. Loved it, and then went on loan to Man United.
Yeah.
And then just stayed because I loved it. So we were just winning everything. I was like, I'll just stay here in Manchester. It's way cheaper up here. Having a great time. And then, 4 years later, I actually went and worked for beIN, which used to be Al Jazeera.
Yeah.
Worked on a World Cup in 2010. And then Olympic year came back to Sky and I've been there ever since.
Wow.
Mad.
Yeah, but what an amazing time you've had. You've done so much and you've been on so many different types of live broadcasts and different shows and documentaries and all sorts of stuff that you've worked on. So we'll get there in time.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing that I said to you before we sat down here was, one of the things that we sort of focus in on and then extrapolate on from in this pod is very much these moments that define everything. And I think definitely, for us as women, there are key moments in your career that you certainly feel have propelled you to the next place. And then whatever might happen in your private or personal life, becomes manifestly the most important thing. And then you make different decisions as a result of those things. But we talked about, what that moment might be for you. And like you said, well, it's not presenting awards. It's not doing an interview with a particular person. It isn't that. It actually comes down to personal stuff.
It does. And I think it's funny in life when you get to a certain age, there are other things that you have to plan and look towards when you want to start a family or relationships, or you want to find somewhere where you call home if you're not working near to where you grew up or something. It's well, where am I going to settle? I think a lot of men sort of in their 30s can plan a career, and I want to go here and I'm going to move up the ladder and I want to be partner at this firm, or I want to move up to there, I want to present this.
Yeah.
Whereas as a female, it was well, when am I going to have a child? How am I going to fit that in? I'm going to have to take some time off. And then it's the childcare and it's everything that comes around that,
Yeah.
And I obviously struggled to have a little one and spent a long time trying to find someone in the first place. And then the older I got,
You found your person in the end.
I did in the end. It took a while. And then, of course, we were trying to have a baby. I was in my late 30s. I had her just before turning 40. And it was a time when I was kind of thinking, okay, what is going to be next in my career? But couldn't even allow myself to actually think about that because I was so desperate to be a mum and have a child. And as soon as you start to think, this isn't going to happen, I was I'd give up everything just to be a mum. So I've got the one now. I'd have loved to have had more, but it just hasn't happened. That ship has sailed, but thank God I've got my one. And I'm still at Sky. And actually, it works for me. And I'm happy. And I'm still challenged. But my little one and family circumstances kind of took a turn and meant that actually Sky Sports and being safe and feeling comfortable, still challenged, kind of fitted around my life. And my priority actually became my daughter, and then spending time up north with my family when my dad was really poorly, knowing that we didn't probably have that long with him. So I was that is more precious than anything else. And people used to say, you're a career girl, I was well, that's happened because I didn't have someone else. So I focused on my career.
Absolutely.
It wasn't I set out to be a career girl. It was my own fault for not being able to get pregnant.
There's no negativity, and there shouldn't be negativity around ambition. We talk a lot about this, don't we, as women who want to achieve things. in whatever you might be doing in the world. Like ambition doesn't need to be a really nasty word around women, but it so often is perceived as that, the driven female professional, it sort of does have these negative connotations, which seem bananas to me, when actually all you're trying to do is do the best possible job that you can do to the best of your abilities. And like you say, the story behind the scenes can be very different to the one presented on camera.
Yeah, of course. And as well, sometimes people don't really understand what you're maybe going through and why you're making decisions. And I'm quite private on my social media and hadn't posted an awful lot, but obviously my dad being somebody very well known, we had to come out quite publicly about him suffering with dementia, and my mum trying to look after him, and then my parents were up north. My other half's birth father passed away just before my dad. His stepdad has passed away, so we've had like a lot of grief in our family, actually.
In a really concentrated period of time.
Yeah, and losing really key people to us as well. And it does make you kind of treasure and think about life in a very, very different way, I suppose.
So you talked about it a minute ago when you said you sort of felt like Skye was a safe place for you and a bit of a haven. You really craved that during that period of time when you, like you said, you had two things happen in quite quick succession, which were really fundamental, big things to happen in someone's world. Like you say, your dad was a hero to many, but also your dad. And so you're dealing with that and the ramifications of that, and then you've got a little one as well to consider. So there's a lot going on.
There is, and it's we're growing up in a time where we're part of this. I've heard of it described as like the sandwich generation, where I'm sandwiched between I'm looking after a young child, but I'm also like looking after my parents. It's not like the days gone by where sort of our parents, or maybe even sort of the generation just a little bit after that, had kids in their 20s, and then they were actually free to thrive in a career. At my age now, I'm still looking after a little one who's just in reception, yet my parents are aging as well. And then it's like, well, what about my career? Where does that fit into it all? And I've kind of just realized you just can't have it all. Yeah. You can't, and that's all right.
Not all at the same time.
Not all at the same time. And you can do these separate things, but again, it's all about timing and having these opportunities come at the right moment. And you have to be in the right mental moment as well. It might look like on paper, oh, okay, well, I've achieved this. I've experienced that. I could go and present this. I could go and work there. But actually, mentally, how much toll would that take on me, sort of thing? And if I want to be the best mum that I possibly can be and spend precious time with my little one, do I really want to be taking on a huge, big new challenge with a little bit of jeopardy involved in terms of not knowing if that's going to work or if it's the right decision? So I think I have always kind of played it safe.
But it's interesting though, because my recollection of you was always that you were actually really up for a challenge, whatever anything got thrown at you. But I think when you do go through these personal mountains that you have to climb, and I went through the IVF thing as well, and the conception issues and stuff that you're talking about. So I know very keenly how that can take its toll. You do just address things differently. You see things differently, don't you?
You do. You definitely do. And like, I never in a million years thought that I would be where I am now in the same job after 14 years. But maybe in my 20s, if I'd look forward and think, okay, well, you're with someone, you're happy, you've got, you're a homeowner. And because that took a while as well, living in a blooming flat in Chiswick that was like worth more than my parents' house up north, thinking, well, I'm going to have to move outside the M25. I'm going to have to like get a different life. There are all these things that you kind of think about and have to consider as well. And actually, I'm very lucky that at Sky, I have been given lots of opportunities to present lots of other things like you did at Sky. Sky Sports News is like our base, our grounding, our hub. I love working there still, and I have the best time, and I've got incredible friends. But I've presented Champions League games, and I've dipped my toe in the waters of doing live Scottish Premiership games, and I've worked on cup competitions. I've done highlight shows. I'm like, actually, I have to sit back sometimes and think, okay, well, I have done this and I have achieved that. So be happy with that and just be happy with where you are now. And you can always look over your shoulder and think, well, what are they doing? Where are they going? What are they presenting? What are they hosting?
And we probably all did a little bit of that.
Of course,
we probably all did a little bit of that way back when. But I think women in sport particularly have each other's backs because they know they've got to. You're sort of, for a long time we've been in the minority there, and while the perception would love to be that we're all kind of at each other's throats, couldn't be further from the truth.
No, it isn't.
And so I think that's definitely a facet of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and if an opportunity doesn't fall to myself, or if it's gone to like a friend of mine in the industry, I am delighted at that. Yeah. And like you say, a long time ago, there weren't these opportunities for females that there are now, and people are looking at a breadth of sort of diversity. And I don't just mean in terms of, ethnic diversity, but age as well. We've got Kelly Cates, who's celebrating turning 50 this year.
Yeah.
And she's just been given the job of one of the presenters of Match of the Day. And I think she's doing incredibly at Sky. I obviously do my podcast with her as well, which is great fun. I'm like, she's doing all these amazing things in her 50th year.
Yeah,
so like,
absolutely.
I kind of look at her and I look at the industry and applaud, those that are making decisions, making sure they're putting these experienced presenters in there rather than just kind of bringing through all these young presenters. There's a balance and there's a place for everybody.
There is a balance and there is a place. And it is, I said the same thing to Gabby Logan about how refreshing it was that, that trio got that Match of the Day gig and how they did it that way. And how her and Kelly, certainly for me and definitely for you, would have been the people that we sort of looked up to sort of at the beginning of our own journeys, because they were able to smash through that ceiling in relative ways. And of course, she's got a really famous dad from the world of football. Actually, so does Gabby. I'm the outlier here. So does Gabby, so does Kelly, and so do you with Gordon. So, your dad, obviously really well known as a great footballer, and well loved up and down the UK. So when something as tragic as that happens, as a family scenario and a family tragedy, you're sharing that with a lot of other people, presumably. Yeah. How did you sort of navigate that? Because that's a really difficult thing to do, I would imagine.
And especially working for a broadcaster where...
A sports broadcaster.
Where we were broadcast. I remember when we had to sort of announce that he had dementia, and it was because he would still sometimes, even all these years later, get people asking him to sign things or go to events, or we were having to turn a lot of things down, and people would maybe ringing up and catch up with him, and he would get a little bit confused about the situation. It's like, we have to let people know. Plus also, we were thinking at the time, this could potentially be because we felt he maybe had this early onset dementia, because he was 63 when he first started showing symptoms as a healthy man, that it might actually be linked to brain damage and heading of the football, because it was in the news at the time. I'd known a little bit more about it through obviously reporting on a lot of these stories as well. And obviously throughout his illness, so many of the 1966 World Cup winning squad passed away, a lot of them through dementia. And I was like, well, there's got to be something in here. Before him passing away, we had many years of him sort of declining. The last 2 years were the worst, especially the last 6 months, not knowing, because he's never going to get better.
Was he diagnosed that early on, or could you just see that was starting to emerge?
I think he was diagnosed at maybe 66, but I remember we kind of went back to a place in time. I remember he went to make a cup of tea. My dad didn't do much for himself. My mum literally does everything, and she is superwoman. But my dad went to make a cup of tea, and he was like, he knew that there was a kettle and there was a mug and there was a tea bag, and he knew he had to get the milk. He just couldn't figure out what went where. And I remember that.
And that's something so elementary, like you say, something so simple, that's going to put a red flag up.
And the strangest little symptoms as well, because dementia in old age kind of follows a little bit of a pattern to the point when it comes towards the end, when you just, most of the time, don't recognise people. You may have, sort of music played and you recognise that, and it kind of evokes those emotions and takes you back to a time and place, but you wouldn't know who anybody was. You wouldn't recognise your own family. You wouldn't certainly know what day or what year it was. That never happened with my dad. He didn't know what year it was. He would get up sometimes and say, right, I'm going to the cliff to go training. Like, where's my stuff? And Mum would be like, you've retired long ago, Gordon. You'll be in trouble if you try and go and get a game for Manchester United now. And we'd laugh about it. And then he'd be, oh God, yeah, of course. But his was very strange, and his symptoms are very different, because it was essentially brain damage. He couldn't swallow, and this was a problem. He lost a lot of weight really quickly, and he had this thing called dysphagia, which I hadn't realised, and a lot of people don't realise. Jeff Astle, Don Astle's father, actually choked and died from choking.
Wow.
In his 50s. He had dementia, but he had the same thing as my dad. I remember my mum called up Dawn to get some advice and help. But I remember at the time, Dawn Astle standing up and saying, well, I'll help these families who are going through it. And she said, oh, it was on her birthday or around about her birthday. And her dad was trying to swallow, but couldn't because the part of her brain wasn't registering the swallowing. Mm. And yeah, he unfortunately choked and died. So from then, my mum was like, right, NutriBullet, food processor, ice cream, soups. So my dad could actually eat, but it was the weight loss that came with it. And then his balance went. So it was all these strange symptoms that you don't traditionally sort of associate with traditional dementia in kind of old age. And it was horrible to see someone so fit and strong and healthy.
I was going to say the vitality of that person who's forever been a sports person and cared about himself and looked after himself in that way. To see that sort of not go in the right direction must have been
that was horrible. And he knew he had dementia, but he would, I mean, even towards the end, he'd be like, oh, I'm fine. One of the last things he said was, I'm fine. I saw him on the Sunday, passed on the Thursday. We were all there with him when he passed away. But on the Sunday, he was like, he looked up and he kind of opened his eyes. He was bedbound by that point, and he was like, Hayley. He sort of went to give me like the thumbs up. I was like, yeah, well, he knows who I am. And he could like barely see out of like one eye and sort of open the other. So he never had that. And we were very, very grateful for it.
Yeah.
But then in some respects, me and my sister would sit and think, God, I wished he just didn't know, because he knows himself and he knew he was dying, but didn't let on to us that he was dying because he was trying to protect us. But we were trying to protect him by we just went along with it. So, and it was weird, like I never had those conversations with him where I sat and was like, do you remember this and do you remember that? We did it in little bits and we reminisced about football and things. Is that
because it just would have been too hard to go there, do you think?
I think he would have sensed that we knew something was up, and he was still trying to, we were all grown up. So I was like, I'm 40 odd year old, my sister and brother in their late 30s, 40. And he was still trying to protect us, and he didn't want us to know that he was really ill. He went for respite care once. Like my mum's 5'5" and my dad's 6'5". So like my mum trying to look after my dad, it took it. She fell and I think she broke her ankle at one point and was like, had her foot up. So dad went into respite care and he was like, it's fine. I'm going to get physio soon. I'm just here to get better. And like, we knew he wasn't getting better, but you just play along with it. And actually that kind of got us through.
Yeah, and in a weird way, when someone is in that scenario, like you say, like, what is the kindest route? What is the best way? And your father. What is the best way to behave in that moment that's going to make them feel as sort of, not reassured, but as comfortable in the moment as they can be.
Yeah, but then I was turning up to work and covering stories where, not necessarily teammates of his, but people from that era. I was breaking the news that, so-and-so has been diagnosed with, dementia, and this person with early onset. And that was quite hard because I was having to like deal with reporting on things like that. I remember when Ray Wilkins passed away, and one of my dad's teammates and really good friends. I've been on holiday and been in and around sort of Ray and his family's life. And that was hard because I was kind of having to put on this front, and I'm at work and everything's fine. And actually
professionalize
it was an escape, and it was great. And because people knew at work what was happening with my dad, I'd get that little thing in my ear, like, we've got a story coming up, like, we're just going to hold it for a minute. We don't need to break it right now. And they would always check in, which is like wonderful. Maybe back in the day they wouldn't have. And it was just, right, let's go for it.
Much more sensitive.
Definitely more sensitive. Yeah. So in some respects, the fact that it was known and people could see what we were going through did maybe help.
But when you were reporting on those stories and the penny starts to drop, or it becomes very apparent that there's a pattern emerging.
Yeah.
What do you take away from that? What did you take away from that? And what did it make you think about wanting to know the truth?
Yeah, it definitely did. But it was very much a case of, well, we're not going to know until my dad isn't here.
Which is just a horrible concept, and you don't want to go there.
And they're like, oh, well, we'll only really be able to determine that when there's a post-mortem. And I remember hearing that, like, I was quite like, oh, so we've got to wait for him to die to know whether he has this. I was like, well, even if we knew that's what it was when he was alive, would we do anything differently? The one thing we did do when we'd said, oh, Dad, one day in the future, if you're not here, what do you want to, like, if we think that you're not very well and you get these headaches and things because of maybe heading the football. And he's like, oh no, just do what you want with me. I was like, oh God. But he had such a sick sense of humor. He said, take me out in a box and the rest of me you can just put wherever. So I was like, oh God. So we got in touch with Professor Willie Stewart, who's one of the sort of leading researchers in sort of brain health and has done lots of postmortems on various sports people, rugby players mainly, boxers as well. So I knew he would be the guy that we would be in touch with when the time came. But I was in contact with him before and kind of discussed a few things. I'd had to get quite matter of fact about things. But I was like, oh, look, my dad does want to donate his brain to medical science.
Because that's the only way you can discover, isn't it? Whether this has been the cause is by actually, like you say, donating the brain for medical research.
Yeah, and then that went back. So we did that privately. But our local coroner determined that actually he wanted to open an inquest because on my dad's death certificate, well, he doesn't have a death certificate, but the sort of interim cause of death, when you're issued sort of a certificate to be able to deal with banking issues and things like that, it was down as pneumonia. But like my dad didn't die from pneumonia. He was bedbound, and because of sort of the liquid intake.
It was a complication.
It was a complication. And eventually that took him because he was so frail and so weak. But we knew that the dementia had killed him. But how had he got the dementia?
So 18 months later, you're still waiting for a death certificate.
Yep. And we're still waiting for the cause of death and whether it's ruled as industrial disease, which it everything points towards heading of the football. And there is CTE that Professor Willie Stewart found. And we sat and he dealt, I mean, he's just the most wonderful, incredible man. And he sat with us and broke down everything in the post-mortem, me and my sister.
Did it help to sort of have that conversation with somebody of that level to talk about the scientific or the science behind it so that you can understand more clearly?
Yeah, it did.
What's happened?
And then it spurred us on to like, okay, we're gonna fight this fight. We haven't done it for like any kind of litigation. We just want information. I would just love to know that if they think it was from heading of the football, that's information that's really powerful to make the authorities and make people in football really start to pay attention to the fact that you can get brain damage from heading a football. When we were in one of the pre-inquest hearings, and Man United, Leeds United and the Scottish FA have been wonderful. They've been really great. Can't say others who might have been involved have.
Also a different time that we were living in.
Yeah, of course.
A completely different time. So nowadays and pushing forward, it might be the case that sort of information is freely available. But, you know, like you say, if you're tracking way back when, that's difficult information to come by.
Yeah. And
so presumably they've got to rely a little bit on your anecdotal take
course.
On how things have gone and whether there has been some other injury in some other circumstance.
That's exactly it. And we'll just wait and let them do their job. I'm so desperate for it to happen. It should have happened by now because I want to know, because it's really important information. Like, I'm sure there will be parents with kids whose young boys head a football like my dad did against a brick wall over and over, and in training he used to stay back with the goalkeeper to head the ball for like goalkeeper training. My dad was a prolific header of the ball. The goals that he actually scored in his career weren't what caused him the brain damage. It was all the training that led up to it.
Isn't it? It never seems to be the game itself. It's about what leads up to that moment and the repetitive nature of what's been going on.
And maybe we can't take heading out of football, but you can certainly take it out of training. There were other things they're doing. I know at Man City in the women's team, this was a good few years ago, they have technology where you can put on sort of a face mask. It's like a simulator, and you can practice heading the ball
instead of actually doing
instead of actually physically heading the ball.
So you would do it in a game-like scenario, but not in training.
Yeah, which is amazing. Yeah. So I'd love to kind of try that out and see what that's all about. But I just we're kind of sitting, just waiting, and I feel like I can't say too much because I'm almost sort of scared about. I work for Sky, of course, as well. And we have relationships with, the PFA and the FA.
Of course.
So, and it's the emotional side of things as well. I just have to deal with it very matter of fact.
Do you feel like you don't have any closure because it hasn't yet come to an end game?
And I've not spoken since my dad died about what it was like. I couldn't have done in those first 6 months. I'd have just broken down. Like, I missed him too much. Like, even now, like, I miss him. Like, I really miss him. I've got little voice notes on my phone that I play, and like I sit on my way to work and I'm like, oh, just to hear his voice.
Oh, don't, you're going to make me go now. No, it's all emotional.
But yeah, the first 6 months I couldn't have dealt with it. And I think we were preparing for him to die, thinking that we were preparing ourselves, but nothing can prepare you for like, my dad's not here. Yeah. And I've got a little one who like adored him. He died when she was 3. Like, it's just cruel. And my sister's got 2 youngest children as well. The eldest suffered the most, Rudy. He's 9 and passed away. And he loved his granddad. And he's like really proud. You played football and you played for Man United. I mean, now saying he played for Man United is probably not the biggest, like, but 10 years ago he played for Man United. Like I miss him. And it's sad to think, like, my mum's now just like on her own. That you play football to be fit and healthy, and he was so strict with us as kids with not eating sweets and chocolate and no fizzy drinks, and you'd open a packet of crisps and be like, there's absolutely no nutritional value in those. And I'm like, yeah, but they taste good, Dad. He liked to drink, we all know that, but that certainly didn't give him dementia.
So how far are you on this journey? Like, how far in, how much longer do you and your family have to wait before you know what the outcome is?
I have no idea. There's no. You just sit and wait, and the FA sort of asking questions, and quite rightly so. They're like, "Well, we want these medical records," and I'm like, "Okay," and I understand. I'm like, "Is that because you really care about making sure that it's a strong case, or is it because you're buying time or killing time, or think, well, the coroner will just give up and say, oh, well, we can't proceed because we don't have enough information?" Like, I'm hoping to God that's not the case. And like, as I said,
there's a duty of care to an awful lot of people to actually know what the truth is here, isn't
and
there?
We're doing it purely for information, because like, I really want to educate people about, brain health. So
it's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like you say, all the while you want answers, of course you do, but it feels like you've gone past that sort of, I suppose what happens with grief is that there are different stages of it.
Yeah.
And there is anger as part of that as well. But it feels like that's not what's fueling this. This is just about actually trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And trying to find out what happened and why.
Yeah.
And how, if you do find that is something that can then be used as an educational resource to take into schools and the young players that are training today, and even just in the the senior teams across the leagues in this country with their training procedures. What does that look like? What should that look like?
No, I know.
Has it changed? Has it evolved? Do you know if in these football teams up and down the country, talk about Man City with the girls, the ladies team, is this commonplace now that they are not necessarily heading into the training regime so much?
And I think in the handbook it says it's reduced. It doesn't say underneath why, which is quite interesting, but it is reduced. And obviously in children up in Scotland, it's you're not allowed under the age of, I can't remember if it's 10 or 12, to head the ball in training. And it's obviously advised against down here. But it's like there needs to come a point where, like, I would have it banned. I would have heading in training just completely banned.
Would you have it in the game banned?
This is weird, because I sat on breakfast TV, and I remember Richard Madeley sitting there. He said, but surely, we just ban it from football. I was like, I asked my dad and he said no. And I was like, that's just wild to me. But football probably wouldn't be the same. But it's much more technical and skillful now.
Do you think he ever correlated the two clearly?
No, never. Until it started. Once he'd heard of other cases, and my dad was like, oh God, well, if they've got that from heading the ball, I'll certainly have it, because that's what he did. That's what he loved. And he used to head the ball an awful lot in training, which is why he scored so many headed goals. So, but we've got up in our house, I mean, it's a picture of him heading a ball, getting the winning goal against England at Wembley. And of course, it was the year that Scotland qualified for a World Cup, like important goals, important moments in time. But I kind of look at those images now differently. And I do get a bit, not angry, I just feel sad. Like, I feel really, really sad. But I don't know how I feel about taking it out of the game. There's a wonderful charity that's been set up for information, and they trialled a game up in Spennymoor, which was where Bill Gates was from, who was a footballer who played for Middlesbrough. My dad obviously had links from Middlesbrough. He coached there, and his wife Judith has set up a charity now. And they trialled a game without heading in it to see how different it was. And like, you didn't really notice. No. It was absolutely fine. I'm like, okay, well, if you could take it out, then yes. But you don't go into football thinking, oh, it's a contact sport where you might injure your brain. If you're a boxer, yeah, more than likely probably going to happen. In rugby, you're a bit more aware of the dangers, but certainly like it's football, like the name is in, the title of the game. So
on the because you're forever now waiting for this outcome, and I hope you get what you need from it, and I hope as a result of that there is this big education play around it. But as you wait for that and see where that goes, on the other side of it, the positives that game has given your father and your family. I mean, there must be this contrasting feeling of emotions there, because it gave you your whole life and your father as he is, and your siblings as they are, and the world in which you live in, and your career even.
I know.
So all of those things are things to be obviously hugely grateful for, and then there's this bittersweet sort of juxtaposition, isn't there?
That's it. And it's really hard because you have to
I can see that.
And I was like, and I'm working in it now. It's given me my career. My dad certainly has. He was working at Sky when I got the chance to come in and just hang around and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And we started off this podcast by chatting about Gabby Logan and her dad, Terry Yorith.
Yeah.
I've just found a shirt of Terry's in our attic, actually. So I'm going to give it back to Gabby, which is really cool, from a Wales game in like the 70s.
Wow.
And obviously Kirsty.
What's it doing in your house?
They used to swap shirts. So and we collected all these shirts that had been in like my grand's attic for like decades, and then our attic. So we got them all out. They were thankfully not moth eaten.
I suppose there must be a ton of that stuff in memorabilia terms of your dad's world. I mean, did you just I mean, that must have been a moment, like rooting through different things and going and immersing yourself in his life, because it is documented. I mean, there are plenty of people out there whose parents, they have to document their own worlds, but actually this is public information. But that must have been kind of an interesting thing to do.
And super lucky, because there's my dad playing on YouTube, and like when my little nephew's like, "Granddad's on YouTube," and I'm like, "Yeah." So that's cool to kids that Papa's on YouTube, and able to go through like programs and things that he played in, and go through all this memorabilia. We recently sold a load of stuff. Unfortunately, we had an attempted burglary, and my mum's literally terrified of living in the house. And we had this big cabinet with trophies and medals and things in there. Some of them were just like my dad's local golfing, trophies, like actually plastic.
In pride of place.
Yeah, in front of like his manager of the month. And he was terrible. I don't know how he got that. He wasn't manager for very long. But we kept all the ones that meant something to us. And this Christmas, Mum put all of Dad's caps from each year of our birth and framed them. So I've got that at home, which is really nice. She didn't want them in the house. And then what do? Shove them in an attic, like just to fester away until one day there's a generation that doesn't really understand the value of it. So we thought, let's just sell a load of this stuff, raise a bit of money for charity, give some of the money to my mum so she can just feel a bit more comfortable about life and go on some lovely holidays and travel a little bit. But it was great bringing all these shirts out, like these random shirts.
So what did you find? What were the sort of things that you found?
Oh my God. So my brother looked into, one of the shirts, oh my gosh, it sold for like £17,000. Wow. A football shirt. Wow. There was like an Iran shirt. Wow. There was like shirts from nations that don't exist anymore. We found who else did we? Lots of different teams. It took a lot of research. We got in touch with Graham Budd, this auctioneer who sort of ran this big auction, and they did it up in Manchester. But it was a lot of collectors of like rare shirts. There was one that I loved. It was a Real Madrid shirt, and it was Manchester United had played Real Madrid in the centenary game.
Yeah,
and the player was called Goyo Benito. Benito Goyo. I was at the Bernabeu not long ago seeing how it was all kind of like new. I was like, oh, my dad's played in there, which is quite weird. I was like, that's kind of funny, but nice and nostalgic. And he had played for the club like his whole entire career. And he's not someone that you or I would have heard about, or many people. But he was in a care home at the time with dementia and had played in the same position as my dad. I was like, it's so weird how like these two incredible shirts from these two great footballing teams playing against each other in their heyday, and it's a centenary, and it's just the sadness of like, oh, he's in a care home, my dad's in the state that he's in. A few of them we got back in touch with some of the families.
Did you do that?
And got in touch with families, and that one's gone back to the Real Madrid Museum, I think, which will be really cool. So that'll be in there at some point, because it was like a unique shirt made specifically for this like
centenary game,
like testimonial shirts and stuff. So I'm quite surprised they're not like completely moth-eaten and stuff. But
yeah, your mum did a good job of looking after them.
So I'm yet to still... Gabby lives not too far from me. I said to her, I've got this shirt. I was like, it's your dad's. Like, it'd be nice to give it back to you in your family, you know? And I remember like years ago when I obviously started off at Sky, and people used to say, oh, McQueen, yeah, she's in here. Or dad, blah, blah, of course. Like, you get the whole kind of nepotism thing thrown at you. I was like, I did study like journalism, and I did grow up with football, and I used to be embarrassed to be like,
you knew more about football than most of the people there.
I'd be like, I worked really hard and I've done this, and I used to like fight my way, like, no, it's just, but I think now you have so many females watching football because they've grown up with it. When I was coming through with your Kirsty's, you know, whose dad obviously played golf, and Gabby and a few of us, it was because not many girls did have that understanding of sport. You were quite unique in that respect, and I'd grown up with it, and now I'm like, yeah, my dad did help me with my career. He pretty much gave it to me, but what he did give me was an understanding of what it's like to be a player, a manager, a coach, a scout, a pundit. So I had my full education, upbringing, you know. I was the eldest of three kids.
I think that's so well put. Because actually, like you say, it's an education that nobody else could ever possibly hope to understand unless they're living in it and breathing it, and actually understanding how each of those different roles come into play, and therefore then asking the right questions and the pertinent questions of those people in an interview situation. You have more knowledge than most in that space, and like you say, it shouldn't be something that you should be embarrassed about. It should be something you should be proud of.
And I am now, but it's funny how for so many years I fought against it. I'd be like, oh, I wish I didn't have like my surname. I wish I was just like married young, and then I wouldn't have my surname, and then everyone wouldn't keep bringing it up, and other people, oh well, you know. I remember seeing this interview, and it was someone who was presenting at the time. They were like, you know, I didn't get here because of my dad. And it was almost like a little dig. I was like, oh, well, I didn't get here because of my dad. Now I'm like, yeah, got here because of my dad.
Yeah, so but like, he must, and you would know this, but he must have been so proud of you.
Yeah.
And of actually, you know, you being able to forge your own path.
He didn't want me to do it
in that world.
When he was like,
did he not?
No, he did not want me to do it.
Why? Because he was, what was he worried about?
And he went to Karen Wilmington, the director at the time, and was like, look, she can come in and do this, but don't want her on TV. I don't want her in this world. I don't want to, like, my whole life it was like trying to make sure I didn't go out with a footballer or marry a footballer. I was like, well, he got his wish in the end. It was all like trying to protect me from his world, because he probably knew the realities of it and the sort of the cutthroat world that we were in, certainly back then in broadcasting, where you never knew if you were safe or not, your flavour of the month, or if you got to 30, were you past it? Did you then start lying about your age? I'm like, I'm 45 now, it's fine. I've like, you can see the age on here. So like, and I've got the experience, and I'm like quite proud of like having worked in the industry for 20 odd years, but it's changed definitely. But he did not want me to get into this world at all. And I think 10 years down the line of working on Sky, it's like, all right, okay, yeah, this is what she's doing then, isn't it?
Yeah, well, quite. He would have had to get comfortable with it in the end, because I know what you're like. He would have had to just at some point go, I'm accepting it. This is the world that she's chosen, and we'll go with it. No, he would have been super proud of you, Hayley. So he would have been so proud. So now you have this great podcast with Kelly and with Christine, which is awesome. And is that just a complete barrel of laughs most of the time?
It is. We go into it every day, like, what do we talk about today? Like, there was no planning. There's no real production. None of us have freaking time to like plan everything or produce. We've got a wonderful producer who used to work at Sky with us as well as a director, and she's now stepped into a producing role. And we're like 4 females who've worked at Sky, as it's 3 of us since it's changed. Christine's, of course, been in the industry as a broadcaster and seen how it's changed. But obviously football links us all together with dads, partners, whatnot. But it's just a really good excuse to invite people on that we actually really like, or that
Who's been your best guest to date? Who's been the one that's been, I suppose it doesn't always need to be like the most revealing or the most exciting or whatever. It's just someone that you've kind of really enjoyed having on.
We just had on Lorraine Kelly, and she was hilarious. Our producer had sort of done a lot of research on her and her career, and obviously we'd seen the kind of Lockerbie story and how she'd cover that as a young journalist and worked for TVAM. And my dad remembers her working in Scotland as a BBC reporter, and she would be the one you'd get your news from. And lots of the stories that she told, like, I'd never heard before. It was great. She was so relaxed, and she was with Christine, who obviously fills in for her slot and presents her show, and she's not there. So it was like the two of them together is like rare. They're never together.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
And Christine was like, it was so weird, like interviewing essentially. She's like sort of my boss, but not really my boss. But we were all like, just all hail Lorraine. And she was just brilliant fun. Obviously, she's a Dundee fan, so that was great chatting to her about football. She talked to us about how she snared her husband, who was a cameraman at the time, and got him drunk on tequila slammers, and basically...
Do you know, I was her runner.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, years ago at
way.
GMTV. So when it was GMTV, one of my first sort of ever gigs, I was a runner there for about, must have been like 2.5 years on the researcher, producer, production scheme that they ran, which was amazing. And so I would regularly take her a cup of tea and her scripts.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. See, it all comes full circle, doesn't it?
It
in
does.
The end? It's amazing.
It does.
And so the final thing I want to talk to you about is the current state of play at Man United, bearing in mind the fact that you have huge links to that club. What do you think? Where's it heading? Where's it going?
Oh, it's just sad. And it's so hard working in it, like trying to remain positive. And I actually like Ruben Amorim.
Yeah.
I like what he's doing. I came off air this morning and I'd seen the whole team kind of training. We had live training shots, and I'm not looking for who's fit and I'm just looking for like the body language and how is it. I'm like, I mean, sometimes it's put on for the cameras, isn't it? But they're very united. One of the things that he's done I really like is he's brought the injured players into sort of the match day sort of preparation. So I think when you're an injured player, you can feel quite outcast, and there's been a good few injuries.
That's interesting.
He's kind of brought the team together. So on match days, the injured players are there as well. They're not like on the outskirts, they still feel part of it. So I like that. There are other things that he's done. I think, okay, great. Like, I love Marcus Rashford. I think he's like great. He's got his England call up again.
Yeah,
and
that's interesting as well.
Come around to Aston Villa, and I'm like, will he come back and play for Manchester United? Obviously, his loan spell will come to an end at some point. But I think trying to handle him, trying to be there for him, it obviously hasn't worked out. But I think he did that in a really respectable way, and I think he commands authority despite being still quite a young manager. I don't know what on earth is going on at the top. I'll leave them to figure out that mess. I don't know what the new stadium is all about. I hate it.
What would your dad think of it, do you think? What would he think?
I think I was all for like, just get rid of Old Trafford, knock it down. But like part of me is like, oh no, like my dad played in that stadium, and I remember going to that stadium. I remember going to like the cliff at the old training ground, and like dad took me to training sometimes. I don't know what was going on there, but I've got pictures of me like just sitting. My mum had 2 kids after me in quick succession. I'm like, she obviously just was like, I can't handle this, just take her to work. But they've got a fancy new stadium, state-of-the-art training ground now. But I was like, okay, well, I came to terms with that, but fine, knock it down. But I thought there would be sort of an element of the Manchester United traditions brought into the new stadium. I like the inside. I like the sort of the bowl. I love like the Allianz Arena. There's other stadiums which I love the look of. It's just this whole like circus tent thing I'm just not loving.
Hayley, thanks so much for coming on. I super appreciate it, and I know it's really difficult. I mean, you made me cry, which is the first on this podcast, but it is a hugely emotional thing to have to revisit all of this. And also, I hope you get the outcome that your family deserves, because, like you say, it is so deserving and so needed, and hopefully it can lead to so many more better things for the game in the future. So I hope that comes soon.
Here's hoping.
Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.